Ms. Phelps, can you tell us just a little bit about yourself and your background and just help these kids just know that science is real, and just you can tell them just anything you want to share is just going to it's going to brighten our day. So thank you so much.
Okay. Yes, so I am Clarice Phelps, and I am a 2003 graduate of Tennessee State University, and I hold a degree in chemistry from Tennessee State. I didn't end up going to graduate school until many years later, and I received a master's in nuclear engineering from University of Texas at Austin. In between that time, I joined the Navy, and I was in their nuclear power program. And that's where I really got my start in, all things nuclear. And so after I got out of the Navy, I started working at Oak Ridge National Lab, which is a couple hours away from you all. And I am still working as a researcher there and a project manager. And I am in my second year of my PhD at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and I'm getting my PhD in nuclear engineering there. So in between that time, some of the work that I've done at Oak Ridge National Lab, when I first started there, I was a technician. And so I was mainly just assisting some of the processing of the mainline radioisotopes that we produce there. And some of those, the main ones are like californium, neptunium, plutonium, and curium, all of the elements that you basically see at the bottom, on the bottom two rows of the periodic table. Those are the ones that I mainly deal with. Now, the isotopes that I manage personally, the ones that I manage the programs for are nickel-63 and selenium-75. And nickel-63 is an isotope of nickel, obviously. And if you guys go through the airport and get your luggage scanned, that big machine that they use for that, it contains nickel-63 in it. And nickel-63 is used, an isotope that is used for detecting bomb-making materials. So those machines that you send your luggage through have an isotope in it that is used to detect whether or not you were fiddling with bombs. And so I manage that program to produce the isotopes for those machines. So that's part of like Department of Homeland Security kind of thing. Selenium-75, which is another isotope that I manage, it's used for like gamma radiography. And if you all know anything about decay, how things decay into other atoms or isotopes, they give off certain types of radiation and particles. And so gamma rays are one of those things. And so selenium-75 gives off a really strong gamma ray that they use to do kind of like an X-ray. An X-ray and a gamma ray are kind of the same thing. They just come from different places, but they use these gamma rays to do like an X-ray of the inside of trucks. Like when they go to, when trucks are driving along the interstate and they stop at those truck stops and they have to get the things on the inside of their truck looked at, they use a gamma radiography source, and sometimes they'll use selenium-75. Selenium is also used for oil well logging so that they can determine where oil wells are in the middle of the ocean. And it's the same concept, using those gamma rays to detect where there are pockets in the ocean that would contain oil. So those are the two projects that I manage there. I've also had the opportunity to be a part of a lot of different and really, really neat projects at Oak Ridge National Lab. One of the first ones that I was on was the purification of another isotope that's at the bottom of the periodic table, and it's called berkelium. And the particular isotope was berkelium-249. And when we purified this isotope, this is back in like 2011, 2012. I don't know if you guys, what grade were you guys in at that time? What grade? No.
Kindergarten, first grade.
Okay, so back when you guys were in elementary school, I was working at the lab purifying this berkelium that was to be used for target material for one of the 4 new elements that had recently been added to the periodic table, and that's Tennessine, named after our state of Tennessee. And so I along with 3 other colleagues, we took about 3 months to purify this berkelium-249, send it to Germany and to Russia, where they made it into electrodeposited into a thin material and bombarded it with calcium ions in order to make 6 atoms of element 117. And so that might not seem like a lot since, there are billions and billions of atoms existing everywhere. So to make 6 atoms of a very rare isotope is actually a really big deal. It doesn't exist for a very long time, so there's nothing you can actually physically do with it. Any kind of data that you get from it is purely theoretical right now. And so most of the things that element 117 can do or are purported to be able to do is merely theoretical science, theoretical chemistry, radiochemistry. Some of the other projects that I was able to work on was plutonium-238, yet another isotope at the bottom of the periodic table in the actinide series. And plutonium-238 is used by NASA. And I don't know if you all know about the Mars Perseverance rover and the Curiosity rover. Those are both powered by plutonium-238. And plutonium-238, it also, most of these radioactive isotopes, they decay via, like what I said earlier, either energy, like gamma rays, or they decay by emitting a particle, like a neutron, a proton, or an alpha particle, or a helium nucleus. And so plutonium-238 decays via alpha decay or a helium nucleus. And so in that decay, it gives off a lot of heat. So you got a lot of heat energy that's created as well. And so they use that heat energy to power their radiothermal instruments. So instruments that require heat energy to work. And so what I did, this was back in 2014, maybe, so immediately after I got done with the berkelium-249, I went to working on a project for NASA, using spectrophotometry. And if you don't know what spectrophotometry is, it's basically using a light to detect the color. It has a detector, so you shine a light on a solution that may have a color, and then the light either absorbs certain colors and transmits others, or vice versa. And so the detector is able to pick up on which colors are being absorbed or transmitted, depending on which way you want to look at it. And it will let you know what type of material that you have based off of the wavelengths that are shown. And I don't know if you all do experiments using UV vis or near infrared spectrophotometry, but that's what I used. I used UV vis and I use NIR spectrophotometry to look at the valence states. I'm sure you guys know what valence states are. Valence states of neptunium and plutonium, specifically neptunium-237 and plutonium-238, which are isotopes. And so these isotopes, they have different valence states, and their valence states have different colors. And you can actually look this up on Wikipedia. So like NEP4 has a different, like an emerald green color, and then various colors, shades of green for the other NEP states. Plutonium, however, has some really, really cool colors. So it can range from pink all the way to green. And so using the differences between the valence states, I was able to see whether I had a certain valence of neptunium and a certain valence of plutonium. And this was important because when you're doing separations work, like when you're trying to separate something that's in a mixture or in something that's in a liquid form containing 2 different components, you're going to try to play on all of the differences between those 2 things in order to separate them from each other. Now, because neptunium and plutonium are right next to each other on the periodic table, you'll find that if you're going into like a separations chemist or analytical chemistry or things like that, you'll find that adjacent elements on the periodic table, like right next to each other, are very hard to separate because they are very similar in their size, in their in their, their electron orbital structure, and their, obviously their nuclear structure. And so it's very hard to separate them from each other. So you have to play on those very tiny differences and maybe manipulate them in order to separate them from each other. And so with neptunium and plutonium, because they're so close together, it was very hard to separate. So we had to play on those valence states in order to separate them from each other. But just looking at a solution, you're not able to tell what valence state each of those components are in. So that's why you use spectrophotometry to tell you, hey, neptunium is in the +4 state and plutonium is in the +6 state. And that's actually where we want it, because in those two states, you're actually able to separate them from each other using a process called a liquid-liquid extraction. And that's like further on down the road. But I used a lot of spectrophotometry in order to identify which valence state those two isotopes are in order to effectively separate those from each other and isolate the plutonium, because that's what we wanted. And the reason the neptunium is in there is because that's how we make it. But all of the neptunium doesn't get turned into plutonium. And so you still have some left over that you want to get rid of and recycle and try to make some more. So after I did the work for NASA, I did some more work with, mainly my work is with the bottom two rows of the periodic table. So I've done some work with californium-252, which is, it has multiple uses. Californium is also a part of the berkelium. So when you make californium, you get a bunch of other stuff with it. And so you want to separate out the californium and the berkelium and the einsteinium and the fermium and all the EIMs, the curium and stuff like that. And so we would take this californium, which is actually very, very valuable. They sell it per microgram. And it's easily a couple $1 million per microgram. So when I handle this material, I'm handling a couple $1 million worth of material. And it didn't make me nervous at first, but when I first started working there, somebody handed me a vial. It had about 1 milliliter of this dark liquid. And I was like, oh, what is this? I'm just looking at it. And they're like, that's $9 million worth of plutonium-244. And I was like, oh my God. So after a while, you kind of get used to dealing with like small quantities of material that's worth a lot of money. And in a sense, it makes you more cautious on a level of, okay, I don't want to waste a couple $1 million by transferring it incorrectly. But then on another sense, you're also dealing with radioactive material that is dangerous to your body, depending on the type of radiation it's giving off. So, safety is always the number one priority. So you always want to make sure that you're handling these materials in a safe way and also not wasting millions of dollars. So you have to kind of think about that too. But with the californium-252 is used for a lot of different things. It can spontaneously fission, and it also decays via alpha decay, and it gives off neutrons because of the fission. And so it's a neutron emitter and an alpha emitter. And so when it fissions, it gives off neutrons and it gives off fission fragments. And so fission fragments are used for other studies. They do some fission fragment analysis. And also those fission fragments, when it fissions, when the atom splits apart and these fission fragments go off, they don't travel very far because they're so big, big on a nuclear scale. They can punch holes in materials to make perforations in like thin membranes. So if you're dealing with when you guys go off to college and you want to do research with very thin membranes and making holes in them, you could use californium as a source to make those little holes because it fissions. Another source for californium is the neutrons. And so you use the neutrons for reactor startups. So I don't know if you guys talk about, that's delving into like nuclear stuff, but
that's like next semester. But
yeah, okay. So next semester, just think about neutrons, and californium is a good source for neutrons. And californium is usually used for reactor startups because it emits lots of neutrons and gets reactors going. And those neutrons are used for other things such as mining. So they use those neutrons in a different way. And californium also is an alpha emitter. And so californium can be used for their alphas. So I did some work with californium, making thin layers of depositing thin layers of californium for fission fragment analysis for another national lab, Argonne National Lab. I'm trying to think. So recently, some of my most recent research, I did some more spectroscopy work on with electrodeposition, because electrodeposition has a lot of different things going on with it, and there's a lot of literature out there on it, but it's very tricky because you have to have a lot of the parameters just right in order to get the desired outcome. And so I did my master's thesis on using spectrophotometry to determine the mechanism of deposition for lanthanides. And that's the bottom two rows, but it's the top row on the bottom. So I used spectrophotometry to look at water bands. And so when you're looking at spectrophotometry, it tells you a lot about what's going on in the solution. And if your solution is water, or if your solvent is water, the water behaves in different ways and changes that the way that the spectrophotometer sees what's going on. And so I used that to my advantage to determine how the material the lanthanide that I was using to electrodeposit, how it was going down. And so I used spectrophotometry for that. One other thing, so that was my master's research. So for my PhD research, I'm hoping to use spectrophotometry again to kind of tease out how some of these separations happen for some of the actinides and maybe some lanthanides. And so right now I'm looking at promethium-147, which is a lanthanide. It is produced by taking some neodymium and throwing it in a reactor, and you get some more neodymium out, but it decays into promethium and then into samarium. And so the good thing about that is neodymium is a nice bluish purple color, promethium is a pretty pink color, and samarium is a yellowish color. So all of those things I can see on a spectrophotometer, which is great. The only thing is that it's very hard to separate them from each other because they're right next to each other. So, I'll be doing some research on that and seeing if I can do some effective separations and see what's going on while I'm doing those separations. Other than that, I think I've had a very rewarding career so far. I am a sucker for education, so I love going back to school. I'm sorry, what did you say?
No, I was going to say I have a class change in about 2 minutes, but if you want to give them a last few parting words and some words of wisdom, that would be great. A lot of them are really enjoying it. I'm really proud of them. Really.
Okay.
And thank you so much as well.
Oh yeah, no, thank you for inviting me. I'll just say this, never give up on what you're very passionate about, because you will find that, it's not just going to be a job for you. It's going to be something that you love and enjoy. And because of that, you will definitely see great success, because people can tell that you enjoy what you do and will feed off that energy. And try to apply for as many scholarships as you can when you go to school, apply for all of them. I didn't do that in undergrad, but now in graduate school, I've been applying for them all. I don't get some, and I've gotten some, and I don't have to pay for my PhD. So if you don't have to pay for school, do that. So.